Hey, this is Chad with Be Gone for Good. I make videos all about adventure motorcycling, from the bikes to the trips to the gear and all things in between. Today I've got something really special for you. We're going to talk a little bit about how to convince your spouse that you need a bike. Stay tuned. Now first off, let me cover a few points just to give a little bit of clarity. I say wife because 99% of my viewers happen to be men. If you have a husband out there, ladies, and you need to convince him that you need a bike, same stuff probably applies. Second, for all those guys out there that would tell you, oh, I don't need my wife to agree to anything, I tell her the way it is, great. Maybe this isn't for you, but if you need a little bit of help to get her on board, also make her believe that this is probably a good idea for you, these tips can probably help out. The first speed bump you're going to run into with any conversation about getting a bike, especially your first bike, is safety. It's a completely reasonable fear for people to have, especially those that don't ride bikes. But I'm telling you, there are ways you can mitigate a lot of that risk. I did a whole video, you can check it out here, all about safety issues and ways that you can lower that problem or lower that issue so that it becomes a more safe environment, something that you have a lot more control over than you may think. Another issue you're likely to run into at some point, maybe not initially when you're starting to ride, but once you get in deeper and longer trips that you're taking, week, 2-week, month-long trips, time away from the wife and the family, especially if you've got kids, is going to be paramount. That's going to be something you run into, and most spouses or wives are going to have some sort of issue with you being out of the house from 7 to 30 days. The last objection I think we need to deal with when initially broaching the topic of getting a bike is going to be cost. There's the initial sunk cost of the bike, but there's also a lot of other costs that you may not initially think of when it comes to the gear, any sort of safety equipment you want to put on the bike, or yourself, your helmet, your jacket, your pants, your boots, your gloves. All of this stuff starts to add up really, really quickly to kind of explode that initial cost of a $5,000, $7,000, $12,000 bike into something much, much grander. You're going to want to plan for this objection because it's almost guaranteed to come up, and it's something that can be dealt with pretty handily. All right, taking these in order. First, safety. There are a lot of little things you can do to improve your chances of survival out there on the road. Taking care of your speed, not drinking while you're on the bike, wearing a helmet, being aware of everything that's going around you will definitely lessen your risk while you're out there on the bike and make it a much safer proposition for you. Inherently, there's going to be risk anytime you're out there on the roads, whether you're in a car or on a bike, and a little bit escalated because you're on a bike. So the safety issue is something that you might have to deal with a little bit, but ultimately it's kind of a personal thing. If you can be smart, ride well, ride safely, you can bring that risk way, way down and make it something that's probably a reasonable option for most people. The second objection, time away from the kids, time away from the family. I would argue this is something you need to kind of discuss in a quality versus quantity. If you are always around the wife, always around the kids, but you're not there fully, you're not present, you're not valuable to them in any way, that time becomes less important. I would argue that spending a little bit of time away to come back and have new experiences, new excitement, new inspiration is far more valuable than always being present. People often have to go away for a little bit for you to really accept and enjoy them coming back in. One of my favorite things coming back from a trip is being able to talk to my wife and my kids about the things that I saw, the new things that I experienced, the feelings I had, and showing them the video that I went through as I was on my trip. These are all really exciting times. It provides an opportunity to have discussions about things that we didn't experience together and makes it just a much more plentiful and a better time for both parties involved. Okay, when it comes to cost, this is one of those things that has to be dealt with. As long as you've got the funds, as long as you can get the initial cost. The positive is that if it's something that doesn't work out, often you can sell a lot of this gear for what you paid for it or close to it without much loss in the total. So instead of dropping out of the sport, being down 15,000, you can drop out of the sport and be down probably 2 or 3 instead, which for most, it's still a kick in the pants, but it's not nearly as dramatic as saying losing $15,000 on a bike that's still sitting in your garage. If you can't make it a long-term lifestyle, getting rid of this stuff, there's always a market for it. There's always a way to sell this stuff. And ultimately, I would argue it's far more costly to do nothing with your life than it is to invest in something that you're passionate about. If you stay at home and you're just a static soul and you never do anything for growth or enjoyment, you'll find that that's going to be far more expensive than spending 15 grand on a bike that you end up not really loving. Okay, so those are just a few of the objections that you're likely to run into. Now let's talk about some of the features that you've got because you've got a bike in the garage now. One, and this sounds kind of ridiculous, but it's something that can be useful to some people. It's far cheaper to be a commuter on a bike than it is in a car. Now this may not matter to a lot of people, but if you can skip tolls, if you can move a lot faster, get there faster, spend a lot less on gas, all of those things end up adding up. It's never going to pay for the bike by itself, but it's always one way to save just a little bit of money each time you go out. Like I said, not a big deal, but every little bit could help when you're making this argument. The other feature, which is kind of nice, more room in the garage. If you were driving a car before and a bike now, you'll find that bike fits really nicely in the garage, on the side, all over. Just a lot easier to work around a bike than it is everything else. Now, what you might not want to mention is all the gear that goes along with it, because your helmet, your jacket, your pants, your boots will start getting spread everywhere. But as long as you can keep that under control, you'll find your garage space is lessened significantly. Now, this is a tough one because I'm not sure that this actually will apply for everybody. It definitely applied for me. Once I started riding a bike, I'll tell you, I had a lot more interest in doing errands. When my wife needed something at the grocery store, or to pick something up over here, or go take something over there, I was really happy to do it. Simple runs to the post office became an enjoyment for me. It took me a little bit longer because I had to get on all the gear to get on the bike, but I loved making little trips like that. 5-10 minutes at a time was fantastic. So if your wife needs a gopher, sometimes getting a bike is the best way for her to get you out of the house doing that type of stuff. All right, the last thing I would like to talk about when it comes to convincing your wife that you need a bike is some of the benefits that go along with this. Now, the first is, for some reason, and I don't know what it is, being on the bike is almost a Zen-like experience. You just are aware of everything that's going around you. You take more stock in smells and the things that you can see and the things that you can hear. It's just a much more visceral environment. And it kind of opens you up to doing this when you're off the bike too. It's a calming experience. I don't know how many of you work close to home or far from home, have some sort of commute. Being on a bike strips a lot of that away because you can't think about the thing that your boss said, or that project that's still going on, or that guy at work that you hate, because you need to pay attention to what you're doing. It all sort of washes away from you on that ride home, which makes you get home with a much calmer, much more relaxed spirit. And I think that that's highly valuable in this super stressed out time that we're living in. That alone, to me, is enough to have a bike. And I think it could help convince any spouse, especially if you come home a little bit edgy. Maybe we need to kind of take that edge off on the way home. Now, because of that Zen-like experience, it allows you to be a lot more present when you are with your family. The way we talked earlier about being more quality time instead of quantity of time, you may be gone more often, but when you get home, you're really invested in what you're doing currently. This is a way to kind of level that off and practice every time you're on the road of being present in the now, being very available to the people that are immediately around you. And when you're off the bike, those are very, very noticeable skills to have. This next point was probably most instrumental in convincing my wife that this bike was a good idea for me. I told her that it was something that I was interested in, told her that the seed had been planted, and it was really something I wanted to go for. And we talked a little bit about how we hope that our sons, as they grow up, when they get that harebrained idea, that crazy thought, that thing that everybody tells them they shouldn't or couldn't or can't do, that they should definitely follow through with it. If it's something that they're passionate about, if it's something that they're interested in, follow that line. And maybe it doesn't go anywhere. Maybe it's something that you turn out when you try painting or drawing or skydiving or whatever. It doesn't really excite you the way you thought it would. Or maybe it turns into something that you're really interested in, the way that biking was for me. I'm so glad that we turned that corner and we eventually got to the point where this was something that seemed like a good idea, and we actually investigated it further because I love it. I love it in a way that I've loved very, very few things during the course of my life. So following that passion, following that desire, I think is a vitally important thing to do, and so important to teach your children to do also. So in using my example in the hopes of how we would teach our children, that was probably the best way to convince my wife that this was a great idea. The last factor, and I would say kind of piggybacks on the previous one, is still really important for everybody to go with, is that we have so little time here that if you have an opportunity to experience more, to drive more passion into your life, do it. Whatever it is that makes that happen. If it's on the back of a bike, if it's jumping off of cliffs in Bali, whatever it is that lights your fire, do it. Find a way to make something like that happen, because if we sit and do nothing, if we just let these dreams sit idly in our mind, it just crushes your life. It kills any sort of motivation you've got to do anything in the future. And ultimately, it compounds, it builds in a mountain type fashion. So as you say yes to these things, and as you say yes to these experiences and going out and changing things and being open to new things, it gets bigger and bigger and it gets grander and grander, and you're more likely to do crazier and crazier and funner things. But the opposite is true also, that the more you say no to these things, the more you turn down those friends that ask you to take that trip or to go try that new thing, the less those opportunities come to you. So we can't trifle with this. If it's something that's interesting to you, if it's something that you want to get involved in, you have to follow it. You owe it to yourself to do it. And I would argue that your wife owes it to you to allow you to do that, and vice versa. If she's interested in taking that bike ride, get her on the back of a bike. Do it safely by all means, but definitely find a way to make that happen, because we're not here long enough to worry about the things that we regret doing. We are far, far, far more concerned about the things we regret not doing. And I would put biking right up there. So if you're running into issues, if you're running into problems with this type of thing, just don't stop trying. Keep working towards it. Keep moving towards it. Take incremental steps. If it's not something that you can do right away and get a bike, go out and take the MSF course where they offer you a bike and get safety certified. Get certified for your motorcycle before you actually get a motorcycle. That's a great way to kind of lean into that process and get a little bit extra and a little bit step closer before you actually take the big jump into your own bike. All right, that's my list of ways to help convince your spouse or your wife or your husband to think that getting a bike is a good idea. I know this is a difficult conversation to have. I had it myself. I had it 3 months after our first son was born, so I understand what you're going through. Keep working at it. It's something that if you have that passion, if you have that drive, it can open up your eyes to so many great things. It's really a life-changing experience, and it's worth any sort of conversations you need to have and any sort of research you need to do to make it happen. If you need any help from me, feel free to message me, and I'll get you everything I can as far as my experience is concerned out, and hopefully we can get you riding.